From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
G'day, happy Wednesday. I really struggled about whether I'd tell this story, but I'm going to tell this story. I was at the pub this afternoon, preparing like I normally do for this program. I do so because I'll sit there with the laptop, I'll sit outside, I'll have a schooner of Coke, and yep, I'll probably have a cigar. And today I went to one of the pubs that I normally go to, but the area that I would normally go to, the smokers area, was blocked off. So I went over to another area, and it was a smokers area off the side of the TAB at the same pub. And people come and go, and some people say good day, some people don't. People generally keep to themselves. And these two blokes walked in. They sat down. What have you been watching? What have you been seeing? What's going on? What do you think will happen in the referendum? And then the topic of what's been happening over the past few days came up. I can't even use code for the racism that was back and forth between those two blokes. Now, you know I'm not woke, you know I'm not somebody who shrinks when people say tough things. But essentially, these two blokes were sitting there in the joy of the Australian sun, having a schooner and going, who cares? Other side of the world. Well, I, like you, am feeling exactly the same exhaustion of seeing it all and hearing about it all and watching it and hearing how many times each and every hour about the awful stuff that's happened in the past few days. And I know that you're not at all like those two blokes, but the idea that there are people sort of amongst us, oh yeah, who cares, other side of the road. What? Now again, there are millions of people who are lucky enough to be born here. That means when you're born here, none of this stuff is part of our life. But if you are born there, this is part of your life. And we all talk all the time about why we should care about this and why we should care about that, and sometimes there's things that happen in the world that the world tells you you've got to care about, but we don't because we're busy and there's other things to do. But I just honestly couldn't believe that two blokes in the afternoon sun, thinking that nobody else was watching, just effortlessly, whatever, other part of the world. Now, for a long time that I've worked in telly or radio, people have always thought that there's this sort of mythical conversation about whether the media does or doesn't cover international stuff because Australians will or won't care. And then there's a conversation about, well, is there a threshold of horrible things that need to happen, or the number of people who pass away or whose lives are taken before you have to recognise it as a story? And then depending on where it is, whether it's the lead story or not. How can you not keep talking about this? Now, in terms of when the Israeli government says that what happened to them in the past few days was like Pearl Harbor or 9/11, remember the images that we were shown for 20 years? 20 years. That were thousands of people all dying at once. And they were the planes going into the towers and then the towers falling. But as devastating as those images were, you didn't see faces. You didn't see the door-to-door effect. Well, the reality of what we have seen in the past few days is a mass murder event. And as the days roll on, we see all of the consequences of it as we learn about the stories of the different people. And then we also see that in Gaza right now, the people who are not Hamas, but may well end up being in the same building as them but not knowing, they too get blown away. And again, I am not going moral equivalency. I'm not going, but what about? Just saying, as your fairly average Australian, I get that talking about the rest of the world sometimes is not normally what we're used to doing, but when this much murder, this much death and this much depravity has taken place, yeah, we're going to talk about it. I'm sorry that it may not be what some people want to talk about, or it's just too much, and I get it. But how can we not? Because regardless of whether it was here or there, all those people are loved by a family. They're all part of a family. And regardless of whether they look like you or sound like you, that our humanity is fairly obvious, right? So we'll keep talking about it. Not all show. I'll try to sort of pop in and out, and we're going to go into The Voice, and we're going to get into other political stuff, because I get it. And I'm not going to talk about the endless horrors over and over, because you've seen 6 different shows tonight that have already quite correctly told you every little thing over and over and over again. But I had to talk about those guys because, honestly, it's all I've been thinking about the past few hours. So, anyway, there is no silver linings here, but there was a ray of light after the disgrace of the protests in Sydney the past couple of days, which of course was this vigil which has been held in Dover Heights in eastern Sydney, as many thousands of people have gathered together to unite with Israel, to support the community. Of course, this is exactly the feeling that should have been uniform across Sydney, but the protests and the garbage that those very people who were standing on that field were told not to go a couple of kilometres down the road to the Opera House, but I'll get to that in a second. Politicians have turned up and have had plenty to say, including the Premier Chris Minns in New South Wales and Peter Dutton, the opposition leader.
Some of you are hated and targeted, sight unseen, character untested, simply and only because you are Jewish. And it is with eternal sorrow that I acknowledge that some of that hatred was seen in your own city, and I'm deeply, deeply sorry for it.
What we know of the Jewish people is their determination, their ability to never give in, to always stick together. And we will always stand with the people of Israel.
For his part, the Prime Minister, and yes, I know he's been criticised, but the Prime Minister was in Melbourne. He spoke to members of the Jewish faith at a synagogue there.
This is the worst loss of life for Jewish people on a single day since the Holocaust. A fact that bears such awful weight for a people who have known the horror of genocide. The government and the people of Australia unequivocally condemn the attack by Hamas.
Now, of course, the wild scenes out the front of Sydney Opera House, I got into some detail about that last night. It should never have happened. Remember, the police had 5 hours warning, they did nothing. Police had 30 minutes warning to stop people moving, but they didn't. Why? Because let's be honest, they were afraid that somebody was going to start kicking in the windows of shops. And apparently that was more important than the feelings of the Israeli community. Just madness. Well, this is going to happen again. Remember, this is not pro-Palestine, this is pro-Hamas. There is a spectacular difference, pro-Hamas rallies. Why? Because there would be no need to have these things right now. This is not about the historic, this, that and the others. This is about, yay, we got one on them. Well, of course, after the one that took place on Monday night, there is a plan for one on Sunday in Sydney. Now, the Premier has made it very clear in New South Wales, you can plan everything you want, it's not going to happen.
The protest organisers have already proven that they're not peaceful. Shouting racial epithets at Jewish community members is not the definition of a peaceful protest. So the idea that they're going to commandeer Sydney streets is not going to happen. And I'm sure the New South Wales Police will make that clear this morning.
Now, despite the fact that the Premier, who wasn't great the first couple of days, his Minister, who is appalling, but I'll give the Premier the benefit of the doubt, he has been able to say the right thing, show the strength, say the sorries and show his support. That's all been great. But of course, the exact same process which the pro-Hamas group completely failed the other day, which was to fill out the paperwork to get the approval, well, they've already been told by the police it's not going to happen, certainly in terms of the official paperwork, but they're saying, bugger it, we're going to turn up anyway. And what about this? What about this? I hope you're sitting down. This was the response of a senior member of the New South Wales Police Force when asked about, hey, well, they're not allowed to protest, they're not allowed to rally, they're not allowed to march, so what happens if they turn up? Now, you would expect the response of any senior officer to be, doesn't matter. We will get on top of this. We will be fine. We'll stop them on the trains, the buses, the whatever. It's not happening. Instead, this.
We can't stop 1,000 people meeting in one spot. It depends on their behaviour once they get there. If that becomes an unauthorised protest, we will take action.
Are you serious? So the brass, not the good men and women of the police force, but the brass of the New South Wales Police Force have said, if you are 999, we'll tell you what to do. If you're 1,000, we can't stop you. Now, this immediately made me thought about the lockdowns and the protests that were against the many hundreds of people who tried to have rallies against lockdowns. Of course, these are in Victoria, but in New South Wales, where people tried to get around Town Hall, but guess what? They weren't allowed to use the trains. They would lock it all off. Now, if one thing we have all learnt as Australians in the past couple of years is that if the state wants to stop you doing something, they can stop you doing it. But we have a scenario here where, because they're worried that some of the pro-Hamas ralliers are going to lose their brain and start smashing some stuff up, don't antagonise. The sails of the Opera House should be lit in blue and white for a week. Every person of decency, from the Palestinian community to the politicians, from the Israeli community to Gentiles like I, can all say that this garbage is wrong. I noticed the project tonight tried to pretend, oh, it's just a small group of people, nothing to see here. Well, why do they even march towards the Opera House when it was obviously a giant FU to the people who were mourning? But the police today, can we run it again? Run it again. The police today said, we can't stop 1,000 people. Seriously, this is the same police force that was able to keep an entire city safe when the Olympics were here 23 years ago. But 1,000 people at Town Hall on a Sunday, no! Have a look.
We can't stop 1,000 people meeting in one spot. It depends on their behaviour once they get there. If that becomes an unauthorised protest, we will take action.
Honestly. All right, back to all of that in a second. James Patterson in a moment. He's the Shadow Home Affairs Minister. Now, I don't think that the people who, what I've said, even the people involved in these pro-Hamas rallies need to end up on any terrorist watch lists. However, there is a chat to be had here about people who are born here who end up becoming so full of madness that they end up doing what happened in the past couple of days. We'll get to that in a second with James Patterson, the Shadow Home Affairs Minister. But as I said, we're going to try to get across it all, but also try to balance it out. Let's get to the voice. It is 4 days to go. The yes and no campaigns making their final push. I've got to say, I'm hearing way more noise, and by that I mean interviews, attention, television ads, all the rest of it coming from the yes side of things. Now, I don't know at this time where we're all very raw and emotional, whether that flips things 2 or 4. And I certainly know today, Colin and Jackie O, they were on the phone with the Prime Minister and said that they're going to vote for it. But we'll see. Early voting is on right now. There has been 4 million people that have already voted. Now, this is a pretty amazing clip of people because that's doubled in the space of a week. It was 6 million people going to the 2022 election. So now that 4 million have already voted with 3 days to go of actual voting, it's not going to get to 6 million, but I wouldn't be surprised if that gets to 5 million. 1.3 million in New South Wales have already voted, 1.1 in Victoria, 850,000 in Queensland. Interestingly, exit polling from the Courier Mail showed that the majority of people they spoke to, both in regional and South East Queensland, were voting yes, which is nowhere near the polling in Queensland. So we'll all wait and see, and we'll all learn together 5 o'clock here on Sky News. Western Australia, 400,000. South Australia, 250,000. The ACT, 80,000. Tasmania, 60,000. Northern Territory, 40,000. There was also, as I say, a lot of noise from the Yes campaign. And when I say noise, I'm not saying because I disagree with it. I'm saying just noise, just activity, stuff that's all meant to make you think that there is only one option in the air. And this, of course, was the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister, in my view, probably should not have gone to Uluru in the past couple of days. As vital and important and emotional as it all is for him, there are other matters that have been happening around the world and other populations that need love and support from the Prime Minister, but that's the choice that he made. He says that it's the honour of his life to have been part of the Yes campaign, so you can imagine the Prime Minister will potentially be among those most upset with the potential result on Saturday night. Also, a whole collection of Australians of the Year, and this goes all the way from Dick Smith to Grace Tame and a whole bunch in between. They've put out a letter today where they say why you should vote yes. We must choose the high road to inclusiveness and respect. The low road leads us into a shameful dead end with unimaginable consequences for our national identity and self-respect. Many other nations with colonial history similar to ours, notably Canada, Norway and New Zealand, have already taken the high road. So we know that a mutually advantageous outcome is possible. Pat Dodson was at the National Press Club today. He said this.
I'm confident that we are able to get sufficient votes in a sufficient number of the states to get us across the line. I don't believe in the polls. I was in the opposition when Bill Shorten was the leader, and we thought we were going to win government. And of course, we got the biggest hiding possible, and we never went anywhere. So polls tell you lies, and don't believe them. If you're fearful about the confusion, vote yes. Don't vote no, because no takes you nowhere.
It's an interesting spin on a rather more successful slogan that's been around for the past few days. For his part, Andrew Hastie was with another collection of WA Liberals, as well as Tony Abbott, who were on with Peter Credlin a bit earlier tonight to explain what's been happening in the state that looks like it could in fact be the biggest vote for no.
What we're seeing here in WA is deep scepticism of this project, a personal project by Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. There is a lot of concern that it's divisive, but to link it back to the cultural and heritage laws, are they concerned that this voice would have a veto say or right over a lot of areas of our life that we share together? And that's why people are trending towards the no vote.
Now, with two massive issues that are taking up all of the media oxygen and all of the conversation right now, no matter how distasteful it may be at the odd pub, still really rocked by that, honestly rocked by that. We, of course, have a lot of other news around, apart from The Voice and apart from what's happening in and around Israel, including... Now, I don't know whether the decision was made to make a decision in New South Wales that they promised they wouldn't make, but they've decided to put it out at a time when everyone else is looking the other way. But let me slowly explain to you this. As you know, possession of drugs in Australia has long been a crime, where not just to purchase but to have it on your person is a crime in and of itself. Now, obviously, people of very small amounts don't end up getting sent to jail. However, there is a chance of a criminal conviction, and that means you don't get to go to Disneyland. Well, as you know, changes that have been taken place in the ACT now mean full decriminalisation, no punishment whatsoever for everything from cocaine to ice, not to mention, of course, what had already been ticked off, that being marijuana. Queensland has also moved to a situation where they have essentially discriminalised possession of small amounts of drugs, a 3-strike rule. Well, of course, how many times is someone going to be, quote-unquote, unlucky to be intercepted by the police 3 times in a row, which effectively means it's a soft way of decriminalising. Now, Chris Minns was very clear in New South Wales that they would not be following this path. This is what he said as late as a month ago.
Look, we've got no plans to decriminalise illicit drugs in New South Wales. There's no mandate for that. We didn't run to the election with it. We've already identified that we will have a drug summit in New South Wales to get experts around the table, but I'm not going to say that we're in the process or considering decriminalising Class A drugs in New South Wales. The consequences are serious, and we're not announcing that.
But will it be a criminal offence to possess small amounts of drugs in New South Wales? No. Because on Monday, while everyone was talking about what was happening in Israel, exclusive story to the Sydney Morning Herald. Then press conference in the past couple of days announcing, no, they're not decriminalising. They're just saying you'll either get a fine or you'll go into a health program. So technically we're not decriminalising, We're just guaranteeing that you won't end up with a criminal conviction.
From next year, anyone caught with a small amount of drugs as a first or second offence can be issued a $400 fine on the spot. That fine waived if the offender completes a drug and alcohol education program.
This is personal use, this is non-commercial, this is not about suppliers.
When we've got more time, we'll get back into that one, the ups and downs and the foibles of it all. All right, now let's get into, again, the situation of these people that have been going to these pro-Hamas rallies, not protest, pro-Hamas rallies in the past couple of days, deliberately intended to be violent in their rhetoric, let alone some of this stuff that we've seen around town, both in Melbourne and in Sydney, about people literally being intimidated because they are Jewish. And when I mean intimidated, people looking to kill the Jews. How did we get here? How did we get to this place? James Paterson is the Shadow Home Affairs Minister. It would be in part his responsibility about the immigration system. But this is not about the immigration system. This is about national security, because many of the people that are involved in the protests that were wildly out of control in Sydney, the ones that are planning to go again on Sunday, and the people that are threatening people in the streets or going looking for people in Toorak were born here. So, James, how do we, apart from a bunch of speeches, how do we make sure that somebody who is born here does not end up in a collective of people of a few hundred that are willing to spew racial hatred out the front of landmarks like the Sydney Opera House?
Paul, this is a really important and fundamental point. There's been a lot of steam being let off on social media in the last couple of days, and that's understandable. And one of the very common themes is, why don't we just deport all these people? Well, many of the people, if not most of the people involved in these rallies and protests, were born here, were raised here, were educated here, and are Australian citizens and have never known any other nation. And in some ways, it's much worse that people born and raised here in our culture and our values are displaying such appalling behaviour and appalling judgment on these issues. It's not so simple as to dismiss it as someone who was raised somewhere else with a different value set. They should have been raised here with good Australian values. I think we clearly do have a problem in this country if at least as many young people as you're displaying on your screen right now for your viewers think it's okay to behave in this way, think it's okay to incite violence against another people in our country on the basis of their heritage or their faith. It's an appalling thing. I think it's got to start with us asserting our Australian values, our universal Australian values, and leadership from the top. No moral equivocation, no false equivalences, no tolerance for this kind of behaviour. And the political leaders who in the last few days have hedged their bets, have equivocated a bit, who haven't been as clear, I think have done us a great disservice as a nation, because we have to send a very clear message to these people that their behaviour is utterly unacceptable and will not be tolerated.
There was a poll that came out, it was partially funded by the federal government, that said 37% of Australians have pride in their nation. Now, pride in their nation has meant different things over different years, but let's be honest, I'm not pretending that everyone has to go back and salute the flag and, some sort of pledge of allegiance at the start of each and every day, or carry on like the Scouts, dib and all the rest of it, right? But there is something that I think we have not modernised or we have let go in being able to rally around pride in a country, regardless of where you, your parents or your grandparents were born, because your first and immediate loyalty should always be to the country of which you were born in. But there are a great many people who see cultural lineage as something that's more important than the country that they live in. Now, again, this is a 2-minute hit on television, I get it, we can't solve the world's problems. But do we actually have to start to look at this as well? Not about a bunch of people being able to say, can you name, the 7 places where Don Bradman got a century? But those basic values about respect for the genders, about respect for other people's faith, about the respect for public places, about the respect for interpersonal safety, that we have to readdress this conversation, because I think that's part of our problem here.
I agree with you, Paul. I think a big part of it is the education system. I think young people have been raised, my generation onwards in particular, maybe not the case for some older generations, but certainly from my generation onwards, to hear much at all that is good about Australia and is good about our history. Now, I'm not someone who in any way supports whitewashing history and pretending that our history is perfect, that would be an equally inappropriate thing to do. But the balance is clearly wrong, and the unifying symbols that we used to be able to unite around, which in a previous generation might have been the monarchy or the church or the flag or Australia Day, those have all been undermined, and generations of young people have now been taught there's nothing particularly good or special about Australia at all. And if you teach people that there's no pride in our nation, there's nothing good about our nation, well then you wouldn't have any loyalty or commitment to our nation, and no loyalty or commitment to the values of our nation. And like you say, some of those fundamental principles which actually make Australia unique, which make it such an attractive place for people from all around the world to come to, like our commitment to freedoms, individual freedoms, like freedom of speech and religious liberty, but also our pluralism and our tolerance and our openness. If those things aren't taught as virtues in our education system, well, unsurprised, surprise, people aren't going to value them, and they aren't going to uphold them themselves in the way they behave.
Good man. James, I wish we had all night, but I just want to get you on because this is a conversation we're going to have at some point. But, of course, any conversation about national pride immediately becomes, look at those two white blokes on top. You get the point. James, thank you, mate. Do appreciate it. Of course, the Home Affairs Minister and a man who's right across his brief. Really good bloke. All right, quick break. Back with more. Got a big one tonight. We'll talk about The Voice next, a whole bunch of other domestic politics, as well as a little touch in and around some of these issues we've just been talking about. But I'm going to try to step back from matters to do with Israel for the next few minutes, and then we'll talk to Megyn Kelly about those a little later in the show. She is fired up. We're, of course, got none other than Barnaby Joyce, Bronwyn Bishop, Joe Hildebrand. Just getting started. Thanks for watching. How's this for a group of people who could go all night, but let's make the most of the minutes that we have together. None other than the lovely Bronwyn Bishop, Joe Hildebrand, and, of course, the wonderful Barnaby Joyce joining us now as well. So let's talk about the final push when it comes to The Voice. Certainly, if anyone was trying to look for where is the money being spent, you're hearing it right now in the terms of like 2 ads in every ad break. You're seeing today the full court press of the former Australians of the Year, Pat Dodson, all the rest of it here. Whether it's too little, too late, well, the polls would suggest rather strongly that that is the case, with just the best part of, 20-something of the 151 seats looking like that they're going to go yes, but an exit poll in the Courier Mail suggests that Queensland men end up going yes. I think we'll wait for the actual result on Saturday. But, Bronwyn, final push here. There is plenty of emotion behind the final push, and it feels like, for want of a better term, as a political campaign, they never change. Like, this is what you're doing when you're winning 60-40, is you send the Prime Minister to Uluru, everyone sort of gets the final push. Instead, they're not realising that it's kind of 60-40 the other way.
I think every time I hear those ads and others hear those ads, it reinforces their view that this is going to fix nothing. And when I hear people ask questions in those ads that I listen to, I'm saying, you know the problems. Why isn't something being done about it now? Why haven't the people who have got the money and access to the money doing something to help those people? If women are dying or children are dying early after childbirth, why isn't something being done about it now? You don't need to put words into the Constitution in order to do something. So every time I hear the ad, I get crosser and crosser.
I do think that just message-wise, I think that no leads us nowhere is better than some of the stuff Yes has served up, but we all know that serving that up with 10 days to go, 4 days to go, means virtually nothing here. Joe, again, I know you're going to say, let's just tick it off, just so everyone who's paying attention to see if you can hold on to your sort of lefty gun and badge, right?
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
I'm still full of hope. I think there's lots of opportunity. Polls can often be wrong, okay? All of that is now done. Again, I don't want to end up in a scenario where we are doing the post-mortem on a campaign before we know what the result is, because a lot of people got that wrong in 2019. Do you think that there are many people that are actually just taking one last pass before they go in? Because some of the polls have shown slightly higher undecideds than they had for a little while. Bronwyn says no.
A couple of things that struck me. One is the perhaps deluded but undying optimism within the campaign, and a couple of people in the campaign are saying it just feels very, very different on the ground. They're feeling a lot more positivity on the ground. Now, obviously,
it's because Thelma and Louise are driving the car.
But also because the people who engage with them, if you're engaging with the Yes campaign, chances are you're a Yes supporter and you're more likely to get in contact. So that's obviously what's happening. And if people are talking to them for longer, chances are they're leaning towards yes. And so people say, oh yeah, once we have the conversation, they vote yes. Obviously, those are people predisposed to. So I'm taking that with a grain of salt. The cabbie I got from, I just went to debate Peter Credlin on this very subject yesterday in Melbourne, and the cabbie I got on the way back to the airport said that he's actually voting yes himself, but he reckons a lot of people are going to vote informally. And, you know, given that all you have to do is go and get your name crossed off, and even if you don't do that, it's only like a $20 fine, there might be a lot of people who, if they don't know, don't go.
Which brings me to this, Barnaby, where I want to get Barnaby in because of just the time here, right? Barnaby, for the people who think, mate, put the queue in the rack, no's already there, don't worry about it, I can sort of vote yes because then my kids will be okay, or the other way around depending on how things go. What do you say to every single person, the majority of the millions that will vote on Saturday, to not assume what the result will be and pretend that their vote is the last one that counts?
Well, you've got an obligation, civic obligation. This is the biggest change in the Constitution in our nation's history, and you've got a civic obligation to vote. If you want the change, you've got to live with the change and be responsible for the fact that you voted for the change. And I don't, obviously, and I've been saying that all the way through. And it falls over at the first premise, that in 2023, we're going to insert a clause where you get access to it on the colour of your skin, on race, a racial clause that Indigenous people get access to a voice, but a white person in the same street who was born in the same hospital, went to the same primary school, same high school, doesn't get access to it, even though they live next door to one another. In regional areas, that just doesn't fly, and it's not an elected body, it's a selected body with real power, If you don't think consultation powers are powers, have a look at what's happening at the Scarborough gas deal, about a $16 billion deal, 170 kilometres off the coast of Western Australia, held up. Why? Because the consultation wasn't correct. So disabuse yourself that this doesn't have real power. It has real power. Otherwise, they won't bother putting it into the Constitution. They just pass legislation for it. And this idea that the actual legislation we see after the referendum. So you get to meet your bride as you're walking out of the Constitutional Church. I don't think that's real clever. I'd like to meet her before I go into the Constitutional Church, or even at the altar, but not on the way out. I don't know.
It's a great premise for a reality
TV show. She might be smarter than me and make me feel bad.
I'll also say this too.
You know, but
again, just as part of sort of the pre-chat in and around campaigns, all right? Now, I understand how serious the issue is, but you want to communicate with Australians clearly, exactly as Barnaby just did, rather than sort of a lot of sort of po-faced seriousness of it all.
I've been on the polling booths in the last 3 days, and two comments. When people come up and say, well, you're voting no, why? Give me a reason. I give them three reasons. One, because it's dividing the country on the basis of race, and we can't do that. Secondly, it will hand the sovereignty of the Parliament to the High Court, and nobody can predict what they will do. And thirdly, the division that has been caused by Albanese as the Prime Minister will be cemented into the Constitution. That is not good for this country. But if you look at what was happening on the ground, I was having nice conversations, as you usually do at a polling booth, with people handing out material. But what alarmed me was a young kid, a primary school kid who came along, tore down the no sign and started stomping on it and said, why are you voting no? And I said, because it's the right thing to do. And we then just picked it up. A kid in primary school. On the other hand, kids who were coming through who were in senior school, they were voting no. Well, they're not voting because they're not old enough, but they were no.
Well, see, it's interesting about this, right, because it does begin to dovetail us into the protests of the past couple of days. People using their kids. I know that this is meant to be the rhetorical device that says, well, someone think about the children, right, which was Reverend Lovejoy's wife in The Simpsons. That, of course, was a joke at the time. It's now become the way that many people try to fight their fights. We saw kids yesterday at the State Library in Melbourne in their school uniform holding up flags. We saw kids at the Opera House. The preacher celebrating was born here. Joe, how do we confront this? Where firstly, let's take the kids off the table as a way of trying to emote other people to agree with us. But secondly, as I was talking about before with James, 37% of people, just 37% of people have pride in the country. Now, I know that pride in the country has been interpreted at different times. I'm not suggesting, it's Southern Cross tattoos for everyone.
Yep.
But that is a problem that I think leads to where we got this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember. I remember very clearly years ago having a conversation with a sort of Labor right thinker who just said, "Why isn't it left wing to be patriotic? Why? And we are on a unity ticket on that front. I think this actually underscores why, or where rather, the Yes campaign has failed. When you say we're a great country and we want to be greater, and we can do this by making sure everyone has equal share in the greatness that we have to offer, you win votes, you make people feel good, you make them feel like they are doing something good for Indigenous people who are struggling. When you say we're a racist country that has a violent, dark history and you need to do this to atone for that, suddenly the voters are just running away like a flock of seagulls.
It is time for those old voices to move away. Jacinta Price presents a new way of looking at things. This is what the Voice is trying to do, Bronwyn. That modernity came, we've embraced it, there are opportunities for people. Do not divide us on race. Make sure that you take the opportunities and we make sure that people get the opportunity.
And I think that's fantastic, but just everyone else... I let everyone else finish. I'm the only person here saying yes, so just give me a shot. Right, firstly, when you talk about a racial divide or dividing people by race, there is already a racial divide in this country. If you're Indigenous, you live less than 8 years younger than everybody. You die 8 years earlier than everyone else. And it's in education, it's in health, it's in employment, it is everywhere, right? So that
Aboriginal people.
In the remote regional communities.
What's this grand Alexa, where apparently once this happens, this remarkable thing, it'll descend from heaven and all the answers will be there. Well,
literally
if the
no
answers
one is
are out
saying
there,
that. Literally nobody is saying that.
Just legislate it, and let the miracle happen. It's ridiculous that apparently that there's somehow a hidden knowledge that'll only become evident to us when an unelected body starts their rounds of Parliament House telling people basically how to
give you
run
plenty
the
of
show.
examples.
It's just absurd. It's an absurdity. And the big thing about what I'm getting all the time, I've been handing out for the last 2 days, I'm getting this. $400 million this is costing us?
Yes.
$400 million? We're going to pee that up against the wall. There is so much more we could have done with that money.
Well, it's only peed up against the wall if it's a no vote. But the point is that...
Well, funny thing about democracy, when you let people vote, one of two things might happen.
I respect the process. But speaking of democracy, if I could just finish, the reason why these systems have been failing Indigenous people is because you talk about going to the hospital, right? Often they don't like to use the healthcare system, or they're suspicious of the healthcare system.
Or they're living in remote areas where there is no hospital.
Because they think it's run by the white colonial oppressors or whatever. The Voice takes away that excuse. The same with interaction with the cops. The Voice takes away that anxiety. The same with the grog bands.
Oh my God.
With the grog bands,
this is the Annandale argument.
It was the inner suburban lefty wankers like the Greens who said you can't have grog bands, it's racist. The Indigenous leaders on the ground said no, we need them, ototherwise all hell will break loose. They were not listened to. If that was actually amplified, if there's an issue with poverty, I can assure you, Joe, it is just as evident for the white people living in the area as it is for the Aboriginal people living in the area.
Correct.
I tell you what, poverty does not discriminate. And if you go to the towns or the remote areas or the remote towns, the issue is intergenerational poverty, not intergenerational trauma, intergenerational poverty. Therefore, you must look after people in the circumstances you find them in, not by reason of the colour of their skin.
All right, guys, I've got to go. We could go all night. I apologise. I know we're in the final stages. I know we are. So look forward to talking about something else next week. Thank you, guys. Do appreciate it. Megyn Kelly standing by to talk about a whole bunch of things, including her reaction to the madness at the front of the Opera House. Again, police today. Oh, we can't possibly stop 1,000 people. Rubbish! Next. Thank you so much for watching. We love Megyn Kelly. It's our highlight of the week to be able to speak to her. And she, even though she's all the way in the United States, absolutely tees off on the pro-Hamas rallies.
They've become so obsessed with identity. They think this is like the new BLM. They don't know what they're talking about. I mean, I'm sick and tired of hearing about, oh, the blockade, you know, look what it's an open air prison. Israel gave Gaza over to the Palestinians. They pulled Israelis out of Gaza under threat of getting shot. They sent armed guards in there to get the Israelis out of there so that the Palestinians could have it to themselves. That's what they did in 2005. And then the Palestinians turned around and elected as their government Hamas, which is identified by the United States as a known terrorist group. And they did what terrorists did, what they do. They conducted more terror. And then they started bombing Israel. And it was only at that point, after Israel had turned it over, Israel moved out, they had whatever they could do whatever they want in Gaza, and they chose to bomb Israel over and over. Israel started sending in pipes so they could have underground sewage and start building it up into what could have been the Singapore of the Middle East. And they turned those pipes around and fortified them into weapons and used them to launch bombs against Israel. It was at that point that Israel created a situation that would allow for food and water and other supplies to get into Gaza, but nothing that could be made into a weapon. What else was Israel supposed to do? That is not colonization. That is not something, that is not an open air prison. And by the way, if Gazans want to leave Gaza, they can. They can go down to Egypt. You know why they don't? Because Egypt won't let them. Where are the protests against Egypt? It's just Israel? Well, why is that? Because a lot of these people, most of these people, any person who was out on that Sydney Opera House chanting what they were chanting is an anti-Semite. That's the truth. You hate Jews. We can see it. It's obvious. You're not fooling any of us. And it's absolutely disgusting. Somehow they've folded this into their woke ideology. I think simply because of the skin color of Palestinians. Well, the Israelis have the same skin color, but have been classified as white and therefore are deserving of none of their empathy. I really think this is how the identity politics logic chain goes.
What about some of the nutty stuff in the American media? Obviously, the initial couple of days meant that they just couldn't say it, but slowly but surely they're starting to say it now, aren't they?
At every turn. It's, the academy, meaning the colleges and the universities, have been completely captured by this leftist ideology, far left ideology, as has the media. And it matters because covering this conflict influences hearts and minds across the globe, but especially here at home. And what we get is headlines like the one we got from Forbes, lamenting the unprompted attack by Israel on Gaza. What? That happened. What are you saying? It's like they have actual Hamas terrorists running Forbes magazine now. Used to be one of the most respected publications in America. MSNBC is so bad, they won't refer to them as terrorists, even though our president, Joe Biden, their guy, is calling them terrorists, as does our State Department. Its official U.S. policy has been for a long, long time. MSNBC can't bring itself to use that term. Militants. Like somehow they're just like a disorganized military group. That's not it. That militants don't chop off the heads of 40 babies. Excuse me for the graphic description. That's what's happening. That's what the local reports are. They're terrorists. They're evil. They're devils. They're inhuman. They're not made of the same things that you and I are. There's no heart. There's no morality. There's no human value that I can relate to in any way, shape, or form. I barely recognize them as humans. It's absolutely shocking how the media and these leftists, like those at Harvard, those at Stanford, at Yale, at George Washington University, at Northwestern University, I could go on, at NYU, the head of the NYU student law group is tweeting out all this nonsense about how everything that happened there is Israel's fault. It's all on Israel. This person worked at one of the most prestigious law firms in America last summer, and now she's tweeting out, she's a BLMer, she's tweeting out this nonsense. And so are all these student groups at all of these prestigious colleges across America. They should be fired. She had a summer internship for a prestigious law firm called Winston and Strawn. I know it well. It was in Chicago when I was there. They should fire her ass. If they gave her an offer to come work for them, it should be revoked. There was a tweet put out today by this big hedge fund guy here in America, and he was saying that there's a group of hedge fund and investment bankers, guys, who are now working to get the names of all the students at the 31 student groups at Harvard who signed this letter this anti-Semitic letter, disregarding all the violence that had been done to the Israelis and putting it all back on them. And it's happening at university after university. Let's get the names of all of them. You can't just let your student group put that out and hide behind the shield of the name, the Democratic Socialists of America or the Student Law Group, whatever. Let's know your name. Good luck getting a job at Goldman Sachs. Good luck getting a job at the Megyn Kelly Show. Good luck getting a job at any of these massive financial institutions, which happen to have a fair amount of Jewish people working there and probably will recognize your anti-Semitism with very little effort. They ought to be shamed and called out. They don't know what they're talking about. They have no idea what happened in the history of the relations between these two. And they refuse to look at the evidence in front of their very eyes, in part because they're watching MSNBC all day, where they're just referring to them as angry militants, as opposed to disgusting, vile terrorists who are chopping off children's heads.
Megyn Kelly is the Megyn Kelly Show. You can find her also on podcast. Quick break. Back with more here on Paul Murray Live. Now, a few people have asked here about Robert Kennedy Jr. Now, whether Robert Kennedy Jr. is a chance of becoming the next president of the United States. I'll give you the tip. No. However, he has decided to announce that he is going to be the third party, an independent candidate for the presidency. Now, RFK should have been on a stage with Joe Biden because he was running in the Democratic primary, but that was all a stitch-up, so he didn't. So RFK got out of it, and now he's running as a third-party candidate. So the question that is often asked immediately by people is, so, who does it help? Does it help Trump? Does it hurt Biden? Or vice versa? Well, guess what? You know I'm a data guy. There was actually a poll that came out by Ipsos, which kind of down the line in terms of polling, but again associated with lefty media. It shows Trump wins a three-way contest between Biden, Trump and RFK, 33 to 31, RFK 14. Now, before we get to the next slide, 14 really matters because if you're at 15%, you get a space at a presidential debate. So imagine the first three-way debate since the 1992 election when Ross Perot was able to, with his candidacy, stop George H.W. Bush in part of getting his second term and Bill Clinton got up. So from where does RFK get his votes? Again, according to this Ipsos poll, 9% of them come from Democrats, 13% of them come from the Republicans, but look at that number. Higher than any other candidate, i.e. Biden or Trump. Independents are willing to basically not have to argue the baggage of Trump, not have to deal with the idiot who can't finish his sentences in Biden. And if they're looking for an agent of either significant change on the left when it comes to economics or a significant change on the right when it comes to battling Big Pharma, guess where independents, at least at this stage, say that they want to go. Now, of course, remember, it's not just one big national election. There are 50 states, which means there are 50 different elections. Now, well, Robert Kennedy, his position may well play better in some states to the advantage of suppressing Trump's vote, therefore Biden, and the other way round. The whole thing with assessing his candidacy is not to look at the overall national number, although that national number is good and healthy at the start. It's to turn around and have a look at the 10 swing states, the places that voted Obama, Trump, Biden. What are they doing when it comes to Kennedy? See you tomorrow night. Here's the late debate.